The evening air was crisp as Elaine Morgan pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders. She checked her reflection in the glossy window of Bellissimo, the most talked-about restaurant in town. Her ordinary face looked back at her, framed by practical brown hair cut in a simple style that required little maintenance. Tonight was special, her 45th birthday, and for once, she had decided to treat herself instead of eating alone at home with only her cookbook collection for company. Bellissimo wasn't just any restaurant. It was the restaurant, the one food critics raved about, the place where reservations were booked 3 months in advance. Elaine had been saving up for this night, putting aside a little money each month from her librarian's salary. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed open the heavy glass door, immediately enveloped by the warm glow of pendant lights and the rich aroma of garlic, herbs, and simmering sauces. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" The hostess, a tall woman with perfect posture and an even more perfect smile, greeted her. "Yes, for one, under Morgan." Elaine's voice was soft, almost apologetic. The hostess's smile faltered for just a moment. Solo diners weren't exactly the norm at Bellissimo, before professionally recovering. "Of course. Right this way." Elaine followed her through the bustling dining room, past tables of laughing couples and animated groups, feeling increasingly out of place in her department store dress and sensible shoes. The hostess led her to a small table tucked away in a corner, half hidden behind a decorative pillar. The message was clear. Single diners were to be kept out of sight. "Your server will be with you shortly," the hostess said, placing a leather-bound menu in front of Elaine before gliding away. The menu was daunting, filled with exotic ingredients and cooking techniques that made Elaine's heart race with excitement. While most people saw food as mere sustenance, Elaine saw it as an art form, a medium of expression as profound as painting or music. She had dreamed of being a chef once, long before life had other plans. A young waiter appeared, reciting the evening's specials with practiced efficiency. When he finished, Elaine couldn't help herself. "The seafood risotto, does Chef Bellini use carnaroli or arborio rice?" she asked. The waiter blinked, clearly unprepared for such a specific question. I'm not sure. Would you like me to check?" "Yes, please," Elaine said, excitement making her bolder than usual. "And could you ask if he uses fish stock or shellfish stock as the base?" The waiter nodded, a bit bewildered, and disappeared toward the kitchen. Through the large open archway that offered diners a view of the culinary theater, Elaine could see the kitchen staff in action. In the center of it all stood Chef Anton Bellini himself, a stocky man with salt and pepper hair and the confident movements of someone who commanded absolute authority in his domain. Elaine watched, mesmerized as he tasted a sauce, barked an order, and expertly flipped something in a pan all in one fluid sequence. This was what she had imagined doing with her life before her parents' health declined, and she became their full-time caregiver for over a decade. By the time they passed, her culinary school dreams had withered into a hobby pursued in her small apartment kitchen. The waiter returned, looking uncomfortable. "Chef Bellini says he uses carnaroli rice and a combination of stocks that's, proprietary." Elaine nodded, disappointed but understanding. "Thank you. I'll have the seafood risotto then. Anything to drink?" "Just water, please." She had splurged on the meal. Alcohol was an expense she couldn't justify. As the waiter walked away, Elaine noticed him approach the chef and say something. Chef Bellini's head snapped up, his gaze finding her across the restaurant. His expression shifted from irritation to something like amusement as he studied her plain appearance. He said something to his sous chef, who laughed loudly enough for the sound to carry across the dining room. Heat crept up Elaine's neck. She was used to being overlooked, even occasionally mocked, but it still stung. She buried her attention in the breadbasket, trying to become invisible. Minutes later, heavy footsteps approached her table. Looking up, she was startled to find Chef Bellini himself standing there, arms crossed over his white jacket, a calculating smile on his face. "So, you're curious about my risotto technique?" His voice had a slight Italian accent, though Elaine knew from a magazine profile that he had been born and raised just 30 miles away. Yes," she stammered. "I'm sorry if I was being nosy." Chef Bellini leaned closer, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You know, not many people who come here know enough to ask about carnaroli versus arborio rice." "Are you a chef?" Several nearby diners were now watching the interaction with undisguised interest. Elaine felt her face grow warmer. No, just an enthusiastic home cook, she answered honestly. Just a home cook, he repeated, his tone making the words sound like an insult. He straightened up and a dangerous gleam entered his eyes. You know what? I have an idea. He clapped his hands together loudly, drawing even more attention. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a cooking enthusiast with us tonight, he announced, gesturing grandly toward Elaine, who wished the floor would open and swallow her whole. This lovely lady thinks she knows something about risotto, he continued. The restaurant had grown quiet, all eyes now on the unusual scene unfolding. So I thought, why not let her show us? What do you say? He turned back to Elaine, extending a hand. Would you like to come into my kitchen and cook the risotto yourself? Gasps and murmurs rippled through the dining room. From the kitchen doorway, several chefs had gathered to watch, smirking expectantly. This was clearly meant to humiliate her, to put the plain, presumptuous woman in her place for daring to question the great chef Bellini. Elaine's first instinct was to apologize, pay for her bread, and flee. But something stopped her. Perhaps the memory of all those nights poring over cookbooks, the countless hours practicing techniques in her tiny kitchen, or the stack of notebooks filled with recipes she'd perfected but never had anyone to cook for. You want me to cook in your kitchen? She asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Unless you're afraid, he challenged, his smile widening. The restaurant manager hurried over, looking alarmed. Chef, I don't think this is appropriate. Nonsense, Paul. Chef Bellini waved him off. We're all about culinary education here at Bellissimo. Consider it a teaching moment. The way he said it made it clear what kind of lesson he had in mind. Elaine looked around at the expectant faces. The waiter who had served her looked mortified on her behalf. A couple at a nearby table whispered behind their hands. In the kitchen doorway, one young chef made a chopping motion across his throat, predicting disaster. Elaine thought about her empty apartment waiting for her, the single cupcake she'd bought herself for later, the birthday cards from her two friends that had arrived in the mail. She thought about the life she'd put on hold and the dreams she'd tucked away. All right, she said quietly, rising to her feet. I'll cook the risotto. Chef Bellini's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He had clearly expected her to back down. After a moment's hesitation, he recovered his showman's smile. Excellent. This way to the kitchen, everyone, make room. As Elaine followed him through the parting crowd, she caught fragments of conversation. Is this some kind of show they put on? Poor woman doesn't know what she's in for. Bellini's going to eat her alive. The kitchen was a gleaming expanse of stainless steel, with stations arranged in a perfect workflow. Heat radiated from everywhere, the flat tops, the grills, the ovens. The staff stood at attention, their faces a mixture of amusement and confusion. Everyone, Chef Bellini announced. This is... He paused, realizing he didn't know her name. Elaine, she supplied softly. This is Elaine, and she's going to show us how to make seafood risotto. He grabbed a clean apron from a hook and held it out to her with exaggerated courtesy. Your station awaits, chef. A young man with a sleeve of tattoos snickered. An older woman rolling pasta dough shook her head in disbelief. The sous chef from earlier crossed his arms, a smirk firmly in place. As Elaine tied the apron around her waist, her fingers remembered the motion from long ago, from a different life, it seemed. The kitchen waited in anticipation of the disaster about to unfold, of the entertainment at her expense. What do you need? Chef Bellini asked loudly, clearly enjoying himself. Elaine took a deep breath. The familiar scents of the kitchen, the sharp tang of lemon, the earthiness of fresh herbs, the richness of simmering stocks, calmed her racing heart. This was a place she understood, even if it was grander than anything she had worked with before. Carnaroli rice, she said clearly, shallots, garlic, white wine, seafood stock, or your proprietary blend. A hint of challenge crept into her voice on those last words. Butter, olive oil, Parmigiano Reggiano. For the seafood itself, scallops, shrimp, perhaps some squid if you have it. And herbs, thyme, parsley. Chef Bellini's smile faltered slightly. He had not expected such a confident, comprehensive response. With a sharp nod to his staff, the ingredients began appearing on the counter before her. You have 30 minutes, he said. The same time my chefs have to prepare this dish. Elaine nodded, already rolling up her sleeves. As her hands reached for the olive oil and a sauté pan, muscle memory took over. For the first time that evening, a small smile played at her lips. The kitchen staff exchanged glances. This birthday dinner was not going as planned, for anyone. Elaine stood at the cooking station, acutely aware of the eyes watching her every move. The kitchen, which had been a symphony of clanging pots and shouted orders just minutes ago, had fallen into an eerie quiet. Only the hissing of flames and the gentle bubbling of sauces broke the silence. "The clock starts now," Chef Bellini announced, making a show of checking his watch. He leaned against a nearby counter, arms crossed, his expression that of someone preparing to enjoy a particularly entertaining disaster movie. Elaine's hands trembled as she reached for the olive oil. The bottle was heavier than what she used at home, made of dark glass with an elegant label. Everything in this kitchen was a reminder of how far she was from her comfort zone. The professional-grade burners that put out twice the heat of her apartment stove. The perfectly sharpened knives that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The team of trained chefs watching her with expressions ranging from amusement to pity. She poured olive oil into a wide, heavy-bottomed pan and added a generous knob of butter. As they melted together, she carefully diced the shallots, her knife skills rusty but functional. A young line cook smirked as she corrected her grip on the knife. "Need help with that?" Chef Bellini called out, his voice dripping with false concern. "I'm fine, thank you," Elaine replied quietly, focusing on the task at hand. She added the shallots to the pan, the familiar sizzle and aroma instantly calming her nerves. Cooking had always been her escape, her private joy during the long years caring for her parents. While her mother had drifted further into dementia and her father fought a losing battle with lung disease, the kitchen had been the one place where Elaine felt in control. There she could create something beautiful, even if just for an audience of two who rarely remembered to thank her. As the shallots turned translucent, she added finely minced garlic, stirring constantly to prevent burning. The rhythm of cooking returned to her body. The practiced movements, the timing she knew by heart, the small adjustments made by instinct rather than recipe. "Shouldn't you be adding the rice by now?" The sous chef called out, his tone suggesting she had already made a critical error. Elaine shook her head, not taking her eyes off the pan. "Not yet. The shallots aren't quite ready." Chef Bellini exchanged a look with his sous chef, eyebrows raised in surprise at her confidence. When the aromatics were perfectly softened, Elaine added the carnaroli rice, stirring it to coat each grain with the oil butter mixture. The rich, nutty smell of toasting rice filled her corner of the kitchen. This step, she knew, was crucial for the final texture. Too short, and the rice wouldn't develop its full flavor. Too long, and it would cook unevenly. "Now the wine," she murmured to herself, reaching for the glass that had been set out for her. "She's talking to herself," someone whispered, followed by a barely suppressed laugh. Elaine ignored them, pouring the wine into the pan with a satisfying hiss of steam. She stirred constantly, watching as the alcohol evaporated and the rice absorbed the liquid. This was the meditative part of risotto making that she loved. The constant attention, the gradual transformation, the promise of what was to come. As she worked, something unexpected happened. The kitchen staff, who had gathered to witness her humiliation, began to watch with genuine interest. The young line cook who had smirked at her knife skills now moved closer, observing her technique with curious eyes. The pasta chef paused her work, wooden rolling pin still in hand, to watch Elaine's rhythmic stirring. "The stock, please," Elaine said, more confidently now. A ladle and a pot of steaming stock appeared beside her. The aroma told her it was indeed a complex blend, richer than a standard fish stock with deep notes of shellfish shells, aromatic vegetables, and herbs. Despite himself, Chef Bellini had provided her with his best. Elaine added the first ladle of hot stock to the rice, stirring gently as the liquid was absorbed. Then another and another, finding comfort in the familiar process. This was how she had taught herself to make risotto, standing in her parents' kitchen with a second-hand cookbook propped open, practicing until she got it right. Later, in her own small apartment, she'd refined her technique. Guided by cooking shows, YouTube videos, and the food blogs she followed devotedly, the risotto began to transform. The starches releasing to create that distinctive creamy texture. Elaine could feel the resistance changing as she stirred, the wooden spoon moving more languidly through the mixture. "How long have you been cooking?" asked a quiet voice. It was the pasta chef, a woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. "All my life, really," Elaine answered, not breaking her rhythm. But never professionally. Where did you learn to make risotto this way? Elaine gave a small smile, keeping her eyes on the pan. Books mostly. Practice, lots of practice. Chef Bellini had pushed off from the counter now, moving closer to observe. His smirk had faded, replaced by a look of reluctant professional assessment. The risotto was coming together beautifully, there was no denying it. The seafood? Elaine asked, glancing up at him. For a moment he seemed startled to be addressed directly. Then, with a short nod, he gestured to a prep cook, who brought over a tray of glistening seafood, plump scallops, pink shrimp, tender rings of squid, all impeccably fresh and perfectly cleaned. Thank you, Elaine said simply. She carefully added the seafood at different intervals, knowing each required different cooking times. The scallops went in first, then the shrimp, and finally the squid, which needed just moments of heat. The kitchen had grown so quiet now that she could hear the gentle sizzle as each piece touched the hot rice. A small crowd had gathered at the kitchen entrance, curious. Diners who had heard about the unusual challenge taking place. Among them was the restaurant manager, looking increasingly concerned about the disruption to the normal service. But Chef Bellini made no move to disperse them. His eyes were fixed on Elaine's hands as she worked, a furrow of concentration between his brows. As the risotto neared completion, Elaine reached for the final ingredients, a splash of heavy cream, a generous handful of finely grated Parmigiano Reggiano, a light touch of finely chopped herbs. She stirred them in gently, watching as the mixture became glossy and rich. Finished, she said softly, stepping back from the stove. There was a moment of complete silence in the kitchen. Then Chef Bellini stepped forward, picked up a clean spoon, and dipped it into the risotto. The entire kitchen staff seemed to hold their breath as he tasted it, his expression unreadable. Elaine watched his face, her heart pounding. She knew her risotto was good. It was the dish she had perfected over countless solitary evenings, the one that had earned rare moments of clarity and appreciation from her father before he passed. But what would a chef of Bellini's caliber think? The chef's eyes widened slightly. He took another taste, then another. When he finally looked up at Elaine, his expression had completely transformed. The consistency is, he began, then paused, seeming to search for words. It's perfect. The rice is al dente but creamy. The seafood is cooked precisely. He shook his head in disbelief. And you've added something to the finish that I can't quite identify. A touch of lemon zest, Elaine admitted, and a small amount of saffron bloom in the last addition of stock. A murmur ran through the kitchen staff. These were not modifications they were allowed to make to the chef's sacred recipes. To everyone's surprise, Chef Bellini nodded appreciatively. It brightens the dish without overwhelming the seafood. He turned to his sous chef. Taste this. One by one, the kitchen staff came forward to taste Elaine's creation. The expressions on their faces shifted from skepticism to surprise to grudging respect. The young line cook who had smirked at her knife skills now looked at her with undisguised admiration. Where did you say you worked? The pasta chef asked. I'm a librarian, Elaine said, feeling her face grow warm under their scrutiny. I just cook at home. A librarian, Chef Bellini repeated, sounding incredulous. The restaurant manager pushed his way through the growing crowd at the kitchen entrance. Chef, the dining room is wondering what's happening. We have orders backing up. Chef Bellini seemed to snap out of a trance. Yes, of course. He turned to the kitchen staff. Back to work, all of you! As the kitchen reluctantly returned to its normal rhythm, Chef Bellini turned back to Elaine. For the first time, he really looked at her not as a plain, middle-aged woman to be dismissed or ridiculed, but as someone who had just done something remarkable. Plate it, he said, his voice gruff but no longer mocking. Elaine hesitated. You want me to plate the risotto? It's your dish now. He gestured to a stack of gleaming white plates. Show me how you would present it. With careful movements, Elaine spooned the risotto onto the center of a warmed plate, creating a perfect circle with a gentle mound. She arranged the seafood artfully on top, finishing with a light sprinkle of fresh herbs and a drizzle of the best olive oil. It was a simple presentation, elegant in its restraint, much like Elaine herself. Chef Bellini studied the plate, then lifted his eyes to meet hers. Take this out, Elaine blinked in confusion. Take it where? To your table, he clarified. It's your dinner, after all. As Elaine untied her apron, still processing what had just happened, Chef Bellini added, "And come back tomorrow." Tomorrow? A smile, genuine this time, tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I think we have more to talk about, don't you?" Elaine nodded, speechless. As she carried her perfectly plated risotto through the kitchen doors, the dining room erupted in spontaneous applause. Word had spread, and everyone wanted to see the ordinary woman who had turned the tables on the famous chef. For the first time in years, Elaine felt something she had almost forgotten: pride. As she sat down at her table, no longer hidden behind a pillar but moved to a prominent spot in the center of the restaurant, she realized this birthday had become something she never expected, a beginning rather than just another lonely milestone. Elaine barely slept that night. Her modest apartment, which had always felt like a safe retreat from the world, now seemed confining. She paced the small living room, replaying the events at the restaurant over and over in her mind. The feeling of standing in that professional kitchen, the weight of everyone's eyes on her, the surprising sense of belonging that had washed over her as she cooked, it all felt like a dream. But it wasn't a dream. The business card Chef Bellini had pressed into her hand as she left was real. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., he had said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Morning came, and Elaine called in sick to the library for the first time in 3 years. Mrs. Patel, the head librarian, was so shocked she didn't even ask questions. "Take care of yourself, dear," was all she said before hanging up. Elaine spent an hour deciding what to wear. Her wardrobe consisted mainly of practical clothes in neutral colors, perfect for blending into the background, which had always been her preference. Finally, she settled on a simple blue blouse that her friend Diane had once said brought out her eyes. Paired with her least shabby pair of slacks, at 1:30, she arrived at Bellissimo, her stomach in knots. The restaurant was different in daylight. Less intimidating somehow, with the morning sun streaming through the windows and staff bustling about preparing for lunch service. A young woman was mopping the floor, while 2 waiters arranged fresh flowers on the tables. "Can I help you?" asked a voice from behind the bar. Elaine turned to see the restaurant manager, Paul. She remembered Chef Bellini calling him. "I'm here to see Chef Bellini," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "He asked me to come at 2, but I'm early." Recognition dawned on Paul's face. "You're the risotto lady," he said, sounding impressed. "The kitchen hasn't stopped talking about you." Heat crept up Elaine's neck. "Really?" "Really," Paul smiled. "Let me tell Chef you're here. Feel free to have a seat." As she waited on a sleek bar stool, Elaine noticed the staff sneaking glances at her, not dismissive looks like she was used to, but curious, even respectful ones. It was a strange feeling. Minutes later, the kitchen doors swung open and Chef Bellini emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. Without his chef's whites, dressed instead in a simple black shirt and jeans, he looked more approachable, though the intensity in his eyes remained unchanged. "Elaine," he said, with a nod that might have been mistaken for a bow. "Thank you for coming." He led her through the dining room and into his office, a small room tucked behind the kitchen, with walls covered in framed reviews, awards, and photographs of the chef with various celebrities. A desk overflowed with paperwork, cookbooks, and what looked like food supplier catalogs. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to a chair as he settled behind the desk. Elaine sat, hands folded in her lap, waiting. Chef Bellini studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I owe you an apology," he finally said, the words clearly difficult for him. "What I did last night, it was unprofessional. Cruel, even." "You were trying to embarrass me," Elaine said quietly. "It wasn't a question." "Yes." He didn't try to deny it. "And instead you embarrassed me. Or rather, you showed me that I should be embarrassed of myself." He leaned forward, forearms on the desk. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" Elaine shrugged slightly. "Books mostly, videos. I've been teaching myself for years." "No formal training?" She shook her head. "I was planning to go to culinary school after college, but then my parents got sick. My mother had early onset dementia, and my father had emphysema. They needed full-time care, and I was their only child, so—" She trailed off, not wanting to seem like she was asking for sympathy. Chef Bellini nodded, a new understanding in his eyes. "You gave up your dream to care for them." "It wasn't really a choice," she said simply. "Anyway, I kept cooking. It was my escape, I guess. And after they passed, it became my connection to them. My mother used to love my risotto even on her worst days. A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with shared understanding of sacrifice. Many chefs had similar stories of family meals and cooking as connection. And now? Chef Bellini asked. You work at the public library. Reference section, she smiled faintly. It's quiet there, predictable. Unlike kitchens, he said with a short laugh. Unlike kitchens, she agreed. Chef Bellini stood abruptly. Come with me. He led her back to the kitchen, which was now in full pre-lunch service mode. Staff moved with practiced efficiency, prepping ingredients, checking stocks, sharpening knives. They paused briefly as Elaine entered, nodding in recognition before returning to their tasks. This is where you belong, Chef Bellini said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, not hidden away in a library, but here creating. Elaine's heart beat faster. What are you saying? I'm offering you a job. He turned to face her directly. Not as a head chef, you need experience for that formal training. But as a line cook to start, you'll work hard, longer hours than you can imagine, for less pay than you probably make now. But you'll learn. You'll grow. And if you're as good as I think you are, you'll move up quickly. Elaine felt lightheaded. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he urged. Life gave you a detour, but now you can get back on the path you were meant to follow. It was tempting. So tempting that Elaine could almost taste it. But reality intruded, as it always did. I can't, she said, the words painful to speak. I have responsibilities, bills, rent. I can't afford to start over at entry-level pay. Disappointment flashed across Chef Bellini's face, but he nodded in understanding. Then we'll find another way. Before she could ask what he meant, he clapped his hands, gaining the attention of the entire kitchen. Everyone, he announced. You remember Elaine from last night? Murmurs of assent rippled through the staff. She'll be joining us once a week on Sundays as a guest chef. Elaine's mouth fell open. I will? Chef Bellini turned to her, a determined glint in his eye. Yes. We're closed for regular service on Sundays, but we do special events. Private parties, cooking demonstrations. You'll be part of that. Paid, of course. He paused, gauging her reaction. It's not full-time, but it's a start. A foot in the door. The pasta chef, Elaine now noticed her name tag read Lucia, stepped forward. I'd be happy to mentor her, she offered, giving Elaine a warm smile. My station is right next to where we do the Sunday demonstrations. Perfect, Chef Bellini said, looking pleased. Lucia has been with me for 15 years. There's nothing about pasta she doesn't know. Lucia's eyes twinkled, and nothing about being a woman in a professional kitchen I haven't seen. It can be tough, but worth it. Elaine felt overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Lucia echoed Chef Bellini's earlier words. We need more women in this kitchen, especially ones who can cook circles around these boys. She shot a teasing look at the male chefs, who responded with good-natured groans. A warmth spread through Elaine's chest, a feeling of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. Yes, she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. Yes, I'd like that very much. Chef Bellini nodded, satisfied. Good. Now let's see what else you can do besides risotto. He gestured to an empty station. Show me your knife skills. For the next 2 hours, Elaine worked alongside the Bellissimo staff, chopping vegetables, breaking down chickens, learning the kitchen's organization system. Her skills were rusty but sound, built on years of practice in her home kitchen. When she made mistakes, like the way she held her knife while finely dicing shallots, corrections were offered respectfully, without the mockery she had feared. By the time the lunch service began, Elaine had been fully absorbed into the kitchen's rhythm. Chef Bellini assigned her to assist Lucia with pasta prep, a relatively safe task for a first day but still important. Don't let him push you too hard, Lucia whispered as they worked side by side. Rolly. Nang out sheets of delicate pasta dough. He forgets not everyone lives and breathes this kitchen like he does. I don't mind hard work, Elaine replied, carefully folding a sheet of dough to cut into perfect fettuccine. This feels right somehow, Lucia smiled knowingly. That's how you know you're in the right place. As the lunch rush intensified, Elaine watched in amazement as the kitchen transformed. The relatively calm preparation period gave way to a controlled chaos of shouted orders, sizzling pans, and rapid-fire communication. Chef Bellini was everywhere at once, tasting sauces, adjusting seasonings, expediting dishes with military precision. "Chef," called out a line cook, his voice tight with panic. "We're running low on the duck confit for the special." Chef Bellini swore under his breath. "How many orders do we have left?" "4 at most," the cook replied. "Stretch it," the chef ordered, then turned his attention to the next crisis. Despite the pressure, there was an undeniable beauty to the dance unfolding around her. Each person knew their role, their movements choreographed through years of practice. Elaine felt a pang of regret for all the years she'd spent away from this world. Lucia seemed to read her mind. "It's never too late," she said as they worked. "I didn't start cooking professionally until I was 40. Had 3 kids first, raised them, then followed my dream." "Really?" Elaine asked, surprised. "Really. And now I'm the pasta chef at one of the best restaurants in the city." She winked. Life has a way of circling back to what you're meant to do. As the service wound down and the kitchen began to reset for dinner, Chef Bellini approached Elaine, wiping his brow. "Well?" he asked. "Still interested in our Sunday offer?" Elaine looked around the kitchen, at Lucia showing a young cook how to properly shape ravioli, at the line cooks cleaning their stations with practiced efficiency, at the pastry chef delicately assembling chocolate sculptures, and felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. "Absolutely," she said, a new confidence in her voice. "When do I start?" Chef Bellini's face broke into a genuine smile, perhaps the first one Elaine had seen from him. "This Sunday, we have a special event. A food critic from the national paper is hosting a private party. 20 guests, all industry people." Elaine's newfound confidence wavered. "A food critic? For my first day?" "Don't worry," Chef Bellini assured her. "You'll be doing a risotto demonstration. The one thing I already know you can do better than anyone in this kitchen." He paused, then added with surprising humility, "Even me." As Elaine prepared to leave, Chef Bellini handed her a small bag. "Your uniform," he explained. "You're part of this team now." Elaine peeked inside to see a crisp white chef's jacket with the Bellissimo logo embroidered on the chest. Beneath it, embroidered in small, elegant script, was her name, Elaine Morgan. She ran her fingers over the letters, a lump forming in her throat. "Thank you," she said softly. "No," Chef Bellini replied, his voice equally quiet. "Thank you for reminding me why I started cooking in the first place. Before the reviews and the stars and the ego," he gestured around the kitchen, "for the pure joy of it." Elaine nodded, understanding completely. As she walked home, the chef's jacket carefully tucked under her arm, she felt lighter than she had in years. Tomorrow she would return to the library, to her quiet life among the books. But now that life had a counterpoint, a new beginning, a chance to reclaim a dream she had thought long lost. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Elaine Morgan couldn't wait for Sunday to arrive. Sunday arrived both too quickly and not quickly enough. For the past 3 days, Elaine had gone through the motions at the library, shelving books, answering questions, helping college students with research. But her mind had been in the kitchen. Twice, Mrs. Patel had caught her absent-mindedly arranging reference books by size, rather than by the Dewey Decimal System. "Are you feeling all right?" Mrs. Patel had asked, genuine concern in her voice. "You've seemed elsewhere this week." Elaine had hesitated, then made a decision. "Actually, I've been offered a part-time position." "At Bellissimo." Mrs. Patel's eyebrows had shot up nearly to her hairline. "The restaurant? Doing what?" "Cooking," Elaine had replied, still hardly believing it herself. As a guest chef for their Sunday events, the surprise on Mrs. Patel's face had quickly transformed into delight. "Elaine, that's wonderful news. I had no idea you could cook professionally." "Neither did I," Elaine had admitted with a small smile. Now, as she stood outside Bellissimo at precisely 10 a.m., her chef's jacket and a bag containing her most treasured kitchen tools tucked under her arm, the reality of what she was about to do hit her full force. Real people, food critics, restaurant owners, culinary professionals would be watching her, judging her food, judging her. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. Inside, the restaurant was a hive of activity. Staff moved purposefully between the dining room and kitchen, setting up for the private event. Tables had been rearranged to create a U-shape facing a temporary cooking station in the center of the room. A small mountain of seafood glistened on ice nearby. "Elaine, you're here." Lucia emerged from the kitchen, her face breaking into a warm smile. She was already in her chef's whites, her gray-streaked hair neatly tucked under a professional cap. "Come, let me show you where you can change." She led Elaine to a small staff room where lockers lined one wall. "You can use this one today," she said, pointing to an empty locker with a temporary name tag. "If things go well, and I'm sure they will, we'll get you a permanent one." "Thank you," Elaine said, setting down her bag. She fingered the crisp fabric of her chef's jacket nervously. "Lucia, I'm terrified." The older woman nodded in understanding. "First-time jitters. We all get them. But what if I freeze up? What if I make a fool of myself? These are food critics, professionals." "Stop," Lucia said firmly, placing her hands on Elaine's shoulders. "You're not cooking for them. You're cooking for yourself and for the food. That's all that matters. The rest is just noise." Elaine took a shaky breath. "Just noise," she repeated. "Besides," Lucia added with a wink, "I've tasted your risotto. They're the ones who should be nervous about measuring up to your standards." When Elaine emerged from the staff room in her chef's whites, she felt transformed. The jacket fit perfectly, giving her a sense of authority she'd never felt in her library clothes. She'd pulled her hair back into a neat bun and even applied a touch of lipstick, something she rarely bothered with. The kitchen was operating at half capacity, with only a few stations active for the special event. Chef Bellini stood at the center island reviewing a clipboard, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as Elaine approached, giving her a quick once-over. "The uniform suits you," he said with an approving nod. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied honestly. He set down the clipboard. "Let me walk you through today's plan. You'll be doing a 30-minute demonstration on risotto technique, the same seafood risotto you made the other night. We've prepared all the ingredients." He gestured to a meticulously organized prep station. "After your demonstration, the guest will have the opportunity to taste your dish, paired with a white wine our sommelier has selected." "Will I have to speak to them?" Elaine asked, feeling panic rise at the thought of public speaking. "Just about the food," Chef Bellini assured her. "I'll handle the introductions and field any questions that aren't directly about technique. Think of it as just cooking with people watching." Somehow, that didn't make her feel much better. As they continued discussing the event, the rest of the Sunday team filtered in. Lucia, two-line cooks Elaine recognized from her previous visit, the young pastry chef whose name she learned was Thomas, and a tall, elegant woman introduced as Isabel, the restaurant's sommelier. "I've paired a vermentino with your risotto," Isabel told Elaine, her voice rich with a slight Italian accent. "The mineral notes will complement the seafood beautifully." "Thank you," Elaine said, feeling increasingly out of her depth among these professionals who casually discussed mineral notes and flavor profiles. "Don't worry," Isabel said, seeming to sense her unease. "They're going to love you. Chef Bellini hasn't stopped talking about your cooking since Tuesday." "Really?" Elaine glanced at the chef who was now barking orders at one of the line cooks, every inch the intimidating figure she'd first encountered. Isabel smiled knowingly. "He doesn't give compliments easily. You must have really impressed him." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Elaine familiarized herself with the demonstration station, practiced her movements to ensure everything would be within reach, and reviewed her mental recipe dozens of times. Chef Bellini checked in periodically, offering brief suggestions on presentation and timing. At noon, the guests began to arrive. From her position in the kitchen, Elaine could hear the murmur of voices, the clink of welcome champagne glasses, the polite laughter of people who were colleagues, but not quite friends. Her stomach twisted into tighter knots with each passing minute. 5 minutes, Chef Bellini announced, appearing at her side. He studied her face, noting her pallor. "Breathe, Elaine. Just breathe." She nodded, unable to speak. "Remember why you're here," he continued, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Not because of me, not because of them, but because cooking is what you love. It's what you were meant to do." Elaine closed her eyes, centering herself. She thought of her small apartment kitchen, of the countless nights she'd spent perfecting recipes, finding solace in the rhythm of chopping, the alchemy of transforming raw ingredients into something beautiful. This was no different, she told herself. "Just cooking with people watching. Ready?" Chef Bellini asked. Elaine opened her eyes, a new resolve settling over her. "Ready? Together, they walked out into the dining room. Approximately 20 people sat around the U-shaped table arrangement, all turning to look as they entered. Elaine recognized a few faces from cooking magazines and restaurant reviews, people whose opinions could make or break establishments like Bellissimo. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chef Bellini began, his voice commanding immediate attention, "thank you for joining us for this special Sunday presentation. Today I have the pleasure of introducing a remarkable talent, someone who reminded me recently of what cooking is really about." Elaine felt her face grow warm as all eyes turned to her. "Last week, Elaine Morgan came to dine at Bellissimo," the chef continued. "Through a series of events," he paused with a self-deprecating smile, "for which I must take full responsibility, she ended up cooking in my kitchen. What she created was nothing short of extraordinary. Today she'll share her technique for what I can only describe as the most perfect seafood risotto I've tasted in my 25 years as a chef." A murmur of interest rippled through the audience. A man with silver hair and an expensive-looking suit leaned forward, studying Elaine with open curiosity. "Without further ado," Chef Bellini concluded, "Elaine Morgan." He stepped back, leaving Elaine alone at the demonstration station. For one terrifying moment, she thought her legs might give way beneath her. Then she looked down at the ingredients laid out before her, the pearly rice, the glistening seafood, the fragrant herbs, and something shifted inside her. These were old friends, familiar companions from countless evenings spent in her own kitchen. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice soft but clear. "Today I'll be making seafood risotto, a dish that celebrates both technique and patience." As she spoke, her hands moved with confidence, reaching for the olive oil, the butter, the perfectly diced shallots. The familiar motions calmed her racing heart, and she found herself settling into the rhythm of cooking, almost forgetting her audience as she explained each step. "Risotto is often seen as intimidating," she said, stirring the rice as it toasted in the fragrant oil-butter mixture. "But at its heart, it's a dish about care and attention. You have to listen to what the rice is telling you." A woman in the front row leaned toward her companion. "She talks about rice like it's alive," she whispered, not unkindly. "In a way it is," Elaine replied, having overheard. "Each grain is absorbing, transforming, releasing. Cooking is just a conversation between the chef and the ingredients." The woman looked surprised, then thoughtful, as Elaine continued her demonstration, adding stock ladle by ladle, explaining the importance of stirring and timing. She became aware of a change in her audience. The polite attention had shifted to genuine interest. The silver-haired man was taking notes. A younger woman with fashionable glasses was recording video on her phone. When Elaine added the seafood, scallops first, then shrimp, finally the tender squid, a visible anticipation filled the room. The aroma of the dish had reached every corner, rich and inviting. She finished with her signature touches, the lemon zest, the hint of saffron, the perfect amount of Parmigiano Reggiano to bind everything together. "And that," she said, stepping back from the completed dish, "is seafood risotto." For a moment there was silence. Then spontaneous applause broke out. Chef Bellini stepped forward, his face lit with pride. "While the staff serves your portions, Elaine will be happy to answer any questions about her technique." To her surprise, hands shot up immediately. The silver-haired man was first. "Where did you train?" he asked. "I'm self-taught," Elaine admitted. "I learned from books, videos, practice." Eyebrows rose around the room. A woman in chef's whites from another restaurant spoke next. "What made you choose to add the saffron at the end rather than blooming it in the first edition of stock, as is traditional?" Elaine explained her reasoning about preserving the delicate flavor, and the woman nodded approvingly. Question after question followed, and Elaine answered each one with growing confidence. These were her people, speaking her language, the language of food and technique and passion. As the staff served portions of her risotto, Elaine held her breath. This was the moment of truth. She watched as the silver-haired man, who she now recognized as Francis Walsh, one of the most feared critics in the city, took his first bite. His eyes widened, then closed briefly. When he opened them, he looked directly at Elaine with new respect. He gave a small, decisive nod. Around the room, similar reactions played out as guests tasted her creation. Murmurs of appreciation, nods of approval, even a few expressions of surprise. Isabel circulated with the vermentino, which paired perfectly with the dish just as she'd predicted. Chef Bellini appeared at Elaine's side, a glass of wine in each hand. He offered one to her. "To new beginnings," he said quietly, clinking his glass against hers. "New beginnings," she echoed, taking a small sip. As the event continued, Elaine found herself drawn into conversations with guests who were eager to know more about her background, her techniques, her flavor philosophy. For the first time in her adult life, she felt seen, not as the quiet librarian, the dutiful daughter, the plain woman who faded into the background, but as someone with valuable knowledge, with a gift worth sharing. "Ms. Morgan," said Francis Walsh, approaching her as the event was winding down. That was quite remarkable, particularly for someone without formal training. "Thank you," Elaine said, still not quite believing she was conversing with the famous critic. "I write a monthly column on hidden culinary gems," he continued. "I'd be interested in featuring you. Would you be amenable to an interview?" Elaine looked at Chef Bellini, who had overheard. He nodded encouragingly. "I'd be honored," she replied. As the guests departed, each thanking her personally, Elaine remained at the demonstration station, still processing everything that had happened. The staff began clearing up around her, but she stood still, caught in a moment of quiet wonder. "Well?" Chef Bellini asked, returning from seeing the last guests out. "How do you feel?" Elaine considered the question. "Like I've been asleep for years," she finally said. "And I've just woken up?" 6 months had passed since that life-changing Sunday, and Elaine barely recognized her own life anymore. Francis Walsh's article about her, titled "The Librarian Who Cooks Like a Master Chef," had run in the city's most prestigious food magazine, complete with glossy photos of her seafood risotto. The piece had gone viral online, with food enthusiasts across the country sharing it and commenting on the unlikely story of the plain-looking librarian with extraordinary talent. The Sunday demonstration series at Bellissimo had become the hottest ticket in town. What had started as a one-time event was now a regular feature, with Elaine at the center. Each week she showcased a different dish, drawing on her years of self-taught expertise and increasingly incorporating new techniques she was learning from the Bellissimo staff. Reservations were booked 3 months in advance with waiting lists that grew longer each week. Today was special, though. Today marked exactly 6 months since her first demonstration, and Chef Bellini had planned something to commemorate the occasion. Elaine arrived at the restaurant 2 hours early, as had become her habit. She enjoyed the quiet of the kitchen before the rest of the staff arrived, using the time to gather her thoughts and prepare mentally for the day ahead. To her surprise, lights were already on in the kitchen. "Hello?" she called out, pushing through the swinging doors. "In here," came Chef Bellini's voice from his office. Elaine found him surrounded by paperwork, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd been there for hours. "You're early," she observed. "Never left," he corrected, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "End-of-month invoices plus planning the new spring menu." "You should have called me," Elaine said, settling into the chair across from him. "I could have helped with the menu planning." Chef Bellini smiled tiredly. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about." He pushed a folder across the desk to her. Elaine opened it to find what looked like a draft menu, beautifully designed with the Bellissimo logo at the top. As she scanned the items listed, her heart skipped a beat. "This is," she began, not quite believing what she was seeing. "Your dishes," Chef Bellini confirmed. "All 5 of them. The mushroom tortellini, the sear, scallops with citrus glaze, the braised short ribs, the roasted beet salad, and of course the seafood risotto that started it all." Elaine stared at him, speechless. "I want to add them to our regular menu," he continued. "With proper attribution, of course. Elaine Morgan's signature seafood risotto, and so on." "I don't know what to say," she managed finally. "Say yes," he replied, echoing his words from months before. "And then say yes to something else," he took a deep breath. "I want to offer you a full-time position as our specialty chef. You would oversee your own section of the menu, train staff on your techniques, and continue the Sunday demonstrations, which have become our most profitable event." Elaine's mind raced. She'd continued working at the library these past 6 months, taking unpaid leave each Sunday for her demonstrations at Bellissimo. Mrs. Patel had been incredibly supportive, rearranging schedules to accommodate her new venture. But Elaine knew it couldn't continue indefinitely. The dual life she'd been leading, quiet librarian during the week, celebrated chef on Sundays, was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. And yet, the thought of leaving the security of her library job, with its steady paycheck and benefits, was terrifying. "What about," she began. "The salary would be double what you make at the library," Chef Bellini interrupted, correctly guessing her concern. "Plus health insurance and profit sharing from the Sunday events." Elaine's eyes widened. "That's very generous." "It's not generosity," he corrected firmly. "It's business. You've brought in more new customers in 6 months than our last 3 marketing campaigns combined. The waiting list for your demonstrations is longer than the one for regular dinner service. This isn't charity, Elaine. It's recognition of your value to this restaurant." She looked down at the menu again, at her name printed in elegant script beside dishes she had created, dishes born in her small apartment kitchen during lonely evenings, perfected over years of solitary practice, now deemed worthy of one of the city's finest restaurants. "Can I think about it?" she asked softly. Chef Bellini nodded. "Of course, but not too long." He smiled, some of his old arrogance resurfacing. "I have 3 other restaurants trying to poach you already." "What?" Elaine laughed in disbelief. "You think I don't know?" He leaned back in his chair. "Francis Walsh isn't exactly subtle when he's scouting talent for his restaurant investor friends. He's been to every one of your demonstrations for the past 2 months. Elaine shook her head, still adjusting to the idea that she, Elaine Morgan, who for most of her life had blended into the background so effectively that classmates had routinely forgotten she was in their classes, was being scouted by anyone, let alone restaurant investors. A knock at the office door interrupted their conversation. Lucia poked her head in. "Sorry to disturb you, but the staff is starting to arrive, and we need to go over tonight's special event." "Tonight." "Right." In the shock of Chef Bellini's offer, Elaine had momentarily forgotten the reason for today's early meeting. "Coming," Chef Bellini said, standing and stretching his back. He looked at Elaine. "Think about it," he repeated. "Your future is here if you want it." They followed Lucia into the kitchen where the Sunday team had begun to assemble. Over the months, the team had grown from the initial skeleton crew to a full complement of staff dedicated to the demonstration series. Thomas, the young pastry chef, was now assisted by an apprentice. Isabel had brought on a second sommelier to help with the increasingly complex wine pairings. Even the front-of-house staff had expanded, with a dedicated team of servers trained specifically for the interactive style of the Sunday events. "Good morning." "Chef Morgan," called Thomas, using the title that still made Elaine blush slightly. "Good morning," she replied, pulling her chef's jacket from her bag. She no longer changed in the staff room. She had her own locker now, her name permanently engraved on a brass plate. As she buttoned up her jacket, Lucia appeared at her side. "Did he ask you?" she whispered. Elaine nodded. "You knew?" "Of course I knew. I've been telling him to do it for months." Lucia patted her arm. "You belong here, Elaine. We all see it, even if you're still catching up." Before Elaine could respond, Chef Bellini called for everyone's attention. "As you all know, today marks 6 months since we launched what was supposed to be a one-time demonstration with Elaine. In that time, our Sunday events have become the talk of the city's food scene." He paused, looking around at the assembled staff. "But today isn't just about celebrating the past 6 months. It's about looking to the future." He gestured for Elaine to join him at the center of the kitchen. Reluctantly, still uncomfortable with being the center of attention despite months of cooking in front of crowds, she moved to stand beside him. "Elaine has agreed to consider joining Bellissimo full-time," Chef Bellini announced. A cheer went up from the staff, catching Elaine by surprise. These people, professional chefs, sommeliers, servers with years of experience in high-end establishments, were cheering for her. The quiet librarian who had stumbled into their world by accident. Additionally, Chef Bellini continued when the noise died down, "I've decided to launch a new program at Bellissimo, inspired by Elaine's journey. We're calling it Hidden Talents." Elaine looked at him confused. This was the first she'd heard of any new program. "Each month," he explained, "we will invite a home cook with exceptional skills to join us for a special dinner service. They'll work alongside our staff to prepare a signature dish of their creation, which will be featured as that evening's special. The goal is to discover and celebrate culinary talent that exists outside professional kitchens." Murmurs of interest rippled through the staff. It was an unusual concept for a restaurant of Bellissimo's caliber, where training and credentials were typically paramount. The idea came to me the night Elaine first cooked in our kitchen, Chef Bellini admitted. It made me realize how much talent might be out there, hidden away in home kitchens unknown and unappreciated. People who, for whatever reason, family obligations, financial constraints, lack of opportunity, never got the chance to pursue their passion professionally. Elaine felt a lump form in her throat. He was describing not just her, but countless others like her, people who loved food and cooking with their whole hearts but had never found their path to a professional kitchen. Elaine will oversee the program, Chef Bellini concluded, assuming she accepts our offer. He looked at her expectantly, along with everyone else in the kitchen, in that moment, facing the collective gaze of her colleagues, for that's what they had become over these past 6 months. Elaine realized she already knew her answer. Had known it, perhaps, since the first time she'd stood in this kitchen, wooden spoon in hand, stirring risotto while the entire staff watched in disbelief. "I accept," she said simply. Cheers erupted again, louder this time. Thomas popped open a bottle of champagne that had apparently been chilling in anticipation. Glasses were hastily distributed as the kitchen staff celebrated their newest full-time member. "To Chef Morgan," Lucia called out, raising her glass. "To Chef Morgan," everyone echoed. "And to Hidden Talents," Elaine added, thinking of all the people like her who might now get the chance she'd been given. "To Hidden Talents," they responded. As they clinked glasses, Elaine caught Chef Bellini watching her, a look of genuine satisfaction on his face. He raised his glass in a private toast between them, from one chef to another in acknowledgement of equals. How far they had come from that first night, when he had called her into his kitchen as a joke, expecting to humiliate her for his own amusement. Later, as the regular Sunday crowd began to arrive for the special anniversary demonstration, Elaine took a moment to herself in the quiet of the walk-in refrigerator. She'd developed the habit of stealing a few minutes of solitude before each performance, centering herself in the cool, dim space. She thought about the path that had led her here, the years of cooking alone, finding joy in creating beautiful food even when there was no one to share it with. The night she'd decided, on a whim, to celebrate her birthday at a restaurant far beyond her usual means. The moment when pride and a lifetime of suppressed passion had made her say yes to a challenge meant to humiliate her. Life was strange, Elaine reflected. Sometimes the worst moments, moments of potential humiliation or failure, contained within them the seeds of transformation. Sometimes it took someone trying to make you small to finally show you how big you could be. A knock on the refrigerator door interrupted her thoughts. "Elaine?" It was Isabel. "They're ready for you," taking a deep breath. Elaine Morgan, no longer just a plain, forgettable librarian. But now Chef Morgan of Bellissimo straightened her jacket, checked that her chef's knife was properly secured in its sheath at her hip, and stepped out to greet her audience. Through the kitchen doors, she could see them waiting, the regular Sunday crowd, food enthusiasts who had followed her journey from that first demonstration, and many new faces drawn by the growing buzz around the woman who had gone from unknown home cook to culinary sensation in just 6 months. Among them, she spotted a middle-aged woman in simple clothes clutching a well-worn notebook. Something in the woman's expression, a mixture of hope and uncertainty, struck a chord with Elaine. She made a mental note to speak with her after the demonstration. Perhaps she would be the first participant in the Hidden Talents program. "Ready?" asked Chef Bellini, appearing at her side. Elaine nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Ready?" Together they pushed through the doors to applause, stepping into a future neither of them could have imagined 6 months before. A future born from a cruel joke that had backfired in the most beautiful way possible.